I searched online and found you were a journalist for almost 30 years ago. And I'm wondering why you choose to be a uni lecturer or not continue to be a reporter in the press.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I guess it's sort of part of oh gosh. So I worked as a journalist, and being a journalist means you have, lots of skills, writing and research skills, and I left journalism to write novels.
Sure.
Crime novels.
Yeah.
And that worked for a while, and I wanted to set a crime novel in a university. And that's how I poked my nose into a university, because I wanted to create a character that was doing her PhD.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when I found out about what was required, and being immersed in the university environment. And I was tutoring and writing in the university environment, and I thought, this is really interesting, I want to do this. So then I did a Master's of Philosophy.
Philosophy, yeah.
And then followed on from that, I did my PhD on the media and
communication.
Yeah. And so that put me on that path, and I just haven't come off it yet.
Yeah, because every time when I have class, I'm always wondering why they want to be a tutor or lecturer, because they all used to be a journalist or reporter in the past. Yeah, so I every time I want to ask this question, but I'm afraid to ask them.
I think they'll all have different reasons.
Yeah,
so the job market for journalists is shrinking, is possibly one reason. But the other thing is, universities are such unique environments where they're so dynamic, with so many ideas flowing, and can be a really vibrant place to be. So that's how I feel. Once I started to become part of the university and started to spend more time in it, rather than just coming and doing classes, but actually engaging with sort of various things that were going on, it was compelling.
Do you decide if you have one more time, or do you decide to be a tutor or still be a reporter? I'm not sure. The crime reporter?
I wasn't a crime reporter.
Yeah.
I was a feature writer.
Oh, yeah.
But then when I wrote books, I wrote crime books. I've no idea why. I just wrote the first thing that came into my head, and that's what it was. No idea.
And because the next question is about the book. If you have one more chance to think about whether or not to stay in Bhutan for almost 12 hours, what do you do now? What kind of decision you want to make now?
If I was going back to Bhutan, I go back to Bhutan regularly. I'm about to go in about 3 weeks, and I'll go again in January, and I was there in January this year. So I continue to go and continue to research there. Yeah. So, yeah, it's still part of what I do.
I saw you were on the investigator in 2018 in Bhutan.
For the World Journalism Project, yes. So the third wave of that starts next year.
Oh, next year?
Yeah.
What kind of things you will do in next year in Bhutan?
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll go and conduct a survey on journalists and how they see their role and how they see the role of journalists in society, and this is part of this worldwide study.
Sure. So currently in Bhutan, is that everything similar in other countries, the journalism world?
Well, no. So that's what makes it so interesting. So the journalism model that they pursue is quite unique in some ways. Mostly it follows the Indian system of media, which also follows the British. So, which is unlike the Chinese system or Singapore or...
Asia one? Oh, no, this Bhutan is also Asia. So
so Asia has so many different media systems, and Bhutan's is quite unique.
Oh, sure. And the next question is just about the journal, and what kind of things you would like to... Oh, sorry, that is one. What kind of challenge do you face when you write this book? Is there ethical issues in that?
Yes. There's always ethical issues when you represent another culture.
Sure.
Definitely. But there's also ethical issues when you write about anybody. So to write about my family, to write about the people that I met, I felt a real responsibility. And I don't have the answer to that, except that that's just the biggest ethical challenge. You're writing about other people, so that it is my view of them.
Sure.
And that puts them in the world through my eyes, not through their own eyes or anybody else's eyes. And I don't know how to be fair, because I am an Australian woman, you know, so I will not understand. So what I tried to do, the way I resolved that ethical dilemma, was to write about the ethical dilemma as much as I could within the book. So what I was trying to do was present, here I am, this is the cultural context I come from, which is why I'm finding this difficult, or why I'm thinking about the way the Bhutanese do this, as a way to at least put that in the mix too, rather than be this distant, omniscient narrator. You know, if you write in third person,
sure,
you're kind of making a claim of authority.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. So by writing in first person and putting myself in the story, I thought was an ethical solution to me writing about other people.
I think that is your reason why you choose to use the personal narrative approach to this novel.
Yes.
So is there other reason, just besides this, to write in personal viewpoint?
The first book I wrote was Baby in a Backpack to Bhutan.
Oh, I didn't read that.
Yeah, and that came about because...
Yes, it seems memories about your husband.
Yes, and making the film there. And when I wrote that one, I wasn't intending to write a book. I was just sending emails home to friends. And because I was writing novels then, crime novels, and I was writing a crime novel in Bhutan while Mel was making the film, because I was just sending these emails home, when I got home, my literary agent said, I've got a book deal for you on being in Bhutan. And I went, but I haven't, I didn't do any research while I was there. I didn't interview anybody.
Sure.
I just wrote emails home. So from that, I constructed the book. And what that did, because I'd never written a travel book before, I hadn't intended to. So I had to go back through all my old emails, which were written in a chatty style to my mates. And that's why that book kind of reads like I don't know, it's a bit chatty and a bit, you know, that's why it's first person. It is me. It's like one long letter about
yourself,
about myself and what I was doing there.
Surrounding environment.
Yeah, so then when I went back 10 years later to work on the newspaper, that I now understood that kind of taught me, writing that book taught me how to write a memoir. But because I was also doing my PhD and I was doing a lot of research and literature into the ethics and all of that, it did make me question it. And part of my PhD was questioning the Shangri-La journalism of Westerners who come to Bhutan and write these happy travel narratives.
I got that.
Well, that meant critiquing my own book, because I had done Shangri-La journalism. That's exactly what mine was. So I had to, in the second book, in Dragon's Voice, include criticism of my first book.
Yeah, because some traveler went to Bhutan and found it's Shangri-La. But in your book, I found that this situation is not the things they imagined, because you only stay for a short time. But if you stay longer, you find the reality environment or something other in Bhutan. Yeah, I think this situation seemed as everywhere in the earth, in the world. Sometimes Western people think China is the traditional one, but if you stay a long time in China, it seems not the same. You had to think before. China not a very traditional one. It also has some strange. I cannot describe what kind of things I live, but I think we should not look in one country in one piece of thinking. It could be multiple. Yeah. So do you do all of your observation and into? So you said that you just email them at home. So
That was for the first book.
Sure.
But then for Dragon's Voice,
Yeah.
I went and interviewed people about the media and how it was evolving.
Yeah.
I went to government ministers, people, community leaders. Then I had an ethical dilemma because I worked for the Bhutan Observer.
Sure, I got that.
When I went to interview government ministers, and they were new, it was a new democracy with a new government, so they were all first-time politicians and members of parliament. When I went and interviewed them, because I was doing this as part of my PhD,
Sure.
I had to give them forms
Yeah.
that you have to give. In fact, you haven't given me one, but the right to.
I just use my student account number to connect to you.
But
Yeah.
To do the PhD,
Sure.
the ethics, I had to put in an ethics application, and I had to have people sign that
Yeah.
they
Oh.
permitted me to interview them, to use that interview in my study, and they had the right to read it and change it before it went through.
Oh.
Now, that giving them the right over what I wrote was ethically appropriate for a PhD, not ethically appropriate for the media. So to these new ministers, I represent Bhutan Observer.
Yeah.
So what I am doing is establishing a precedent where when they're interviewed by a journalist in their own country, they get to see what they're going to write and change
Of
it.
course.
And that's not good for a democracy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not good for an emerging journalism.
Sure.
So I was ethically challenged by that. And the way I resolved that was I did the interviews and I couldn't use any of them.
Oh, yeah.
Because if they had to sign a form and I had to give it back to them, I wasn't going to do that. That would be inappropriate in another country to establish that, to impose these Western ethics
Yeah.
on another country is imperialism. And so that was an ethical dilemma.
Sure. So you just in your book you write what you collect information, not all the information you observed observed in Bhutan, such as to interview some ministries or other reporters. Is that right?
Yeah, so the journalists on the Bhutan Observer knew what I was there doing. They were friends, and what I did was before the book was published, I sent it to Punso Wongmo
Oh yeah.
and to Nudrup Songpo, the editor-in-chief. I sent both of them and said, you need to approve this. I'm not running it, I'm not sending it to the
Sure.
publisher until you do. And Punso Wongmo had nothing to add. She said fine. And it was culturally appropriate for me to ask her, not to show every single person. That was culturally appropriate. And then I showed Nudrup Songpo, who did object to me naming one of their staff who had been badly behaved and was sacked.
Oh yeah.
Because it's a small society.
Yeah,
And he
everyone knows.
Yeah. So he wanted me to remove that. Happy to remove it. And through it went.
Sure.
And they published it. Bhutan Observer published a Bhutanese edition first.
Amazing. And another question is, why you decide to choose this kind of genre to write this book? So I think you can write the Dragon's Voice in novel or in other kind of writing styles. Why you decide to choose non-fiction? I'm not sure I can define this book in non-fiction relative book.
It is. It's non-fiction.
Sure.
So a novel
Yeah.
is made up.
Yeah.
That's fiction. This is non-fiction, like narrative journalism.
Sure.
So it has to be true.
Yeah.
And everything in it is true. It's subjective because it's my personal view,
Yeah.
but it is true within that context.
How to deal with the balance of true and your objective thinking?
Yeah, that's something every author has to figure out. Every
Sure.
writer has to find their way through that. That is an
Yeah.
ethical dilemma. But I would say I learned to write
Yeah.
when I was a child by
Yeah.
writing letters to my grandmother when I was on holidays.
Yeah.
And my mother made me write letters to my nana every time we went anywhere. And I would sit there with a pen and paper and say, but what do I write? And she said, just imagine you're talking to her. So I go, dear Nana, and that is what taught me to write. So this comes very naturally.
Yeah, this
to
very
me.
naturally to you.
Mm.
So what the non-fiction this writing genre allow you to do, and you have to do in this book in Dragon's Voice?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Because it's a non-fiction book, and what is this kind of writing genre allow you to do in this book?
Oh, I see. Well, so non-fiction and literary narrative journalism, what it allows you to do is to explore things yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the answers to things, but you can show discuss it with yourself. You can contemplate things in writing. So I found it really challenging, some of the domestic violence and the way the society dealt with it. And that's a really sensitive issue. For me to come in from outside and criticise how they do anything. So the way I resolved that was by contemplating those things and writing about it. All the ethical dilemmas I had, I wrote about and put them in the book.
Yeah, because I remember that one chapter, night hunting, in your book, and there are opposite two point of view in this book. One newspaper thinks that is a negative one. A negative seems like rape. In the country, but your newspaper's editor-in-chief said that it's a traditional cultural customer. So you should not to I think you should not to think it is a very negative one. You should not ban it all. So I think between this kind of point of view, we can find that newspaper in that country and in that time could develop a lot, because there were not only one voice in newspaper.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was trying to work out how can they all have such different points of view.
Yeah.
Which says more about me than it does about them. Everybody, nowhere's homogenous. Families don't agree on ideas.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they be? And so I realised that my natural way is to expect things to be clear and consistent. And they're not in any society, in any family. So this made me think about this. Why do the two newspapers hold different points of view? And it made me realise how the city and the rural is quite a different points of view, and that's part of the tension. And, in Australia we have left and right, and it's political divide. They don't have that. So this was the divide. Yeah. And it was really interesting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting for me to read this kind of chapter. And another kind of question is, what lessons you learned about, such as literary journalism, negative long-form fiction, creative non-fiction, or others? What kind of lessons you have learned before?
Yes, I've learned to sit down and just write, which is an extension of how I learned writing from my grandmother when I was 8.
Sure.
Sitting down and writing, and then it's the editing. So I put it all down as it comes out of my head. I put it down as if I am talking to someone. Get it all down, and then go back and edit. You cannot edit enough. Polish. And I find this now teaching writing, that students hand in work that is like a first draft. It's all there.
It's terrible.
It's the writing. You need to keep going, keep editing.
Keep it short.
Yeah, and get up and walk around the room. Leave it. Come back in a week. If I went back and looked at Dragon's Voice, I'd be going through it with a red pen. I'd be fixing it all the way, constantly editing. I couldn't bear to look at it for that reason. So, yeah, I think that's what I've learned, to write long-form narrative, because sometimes you're not clear on what it is you think and why you think it. Just get it down. Come back to that later. So you need to get it all down first, then see what you've got to work with.
Sure, because I have learned the hard news style and the filter writing. I think it's quite different. In hard news, you have to put everything in the first sentence, but in filter writing, you can do everything you want to do. You can put the character personality everywhere of your writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think exercise is everything.
Yes, but the hard news
Yeah.
writing is really, really good to show you what's unnecessary.
Sure.
It sharpens your writing so that when you do long form journalism, you're less self indulgent. When I read narrative journalism, that's what I think is when it's poorly written, it's self indulgent because they're writing about things that either read or don't care. Oh,
Yeah.
boring, 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 boring. And that's a discipline.
Yeah.
When you're writing it, if you lose sight of the reader, which it's easier to do when you're writing narrative journalism.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge for everyone to keep your reader reading your narrative books.
Yeah.
So how to deal with this kind of question?
One thing that helps enormously is experience. And if you read reading experience, read a lot. When you read other people's work, you start to see where they're sharp and where they're not. And it helps your internal critic, because what you have to be able to do is bring a critical eye to your own work. You have to be able to separate yourself from the writing of it. So once you've written it, then you need to bring a fresh eye. And that is really hard because you read what you wrote in the same voice.
Yeah.
That's what you've got to try. That takes experience and reading lots of other people's work. And you just internalise it. There's nothing you have to do, but when you're reading someone else's work, you are seeing it with a critical eye, like you are seeing it with a fresh eye, and you need to then bring that critical eye to your own work.
Yeah, critical eye is very important.
Yeah, so edit.
So do you have issues about any other stream terms? Not just the literally journalism, creating non-fiction. Do you have other kind of stream term?
Like other types of writing that I do?
Yeah.
I teach news writing. I've taught literary journalism. I've taught feature writing. I've taught memoir.
Yeah. Do you think something is better than other thing, or all of them are similar in your word, in your thinking?
I think that the skills you learn from news writing underpin good writing later.
Yeah.
So then when you go on to do narrative journalism, feature writing,
yeah.
memoir, anything else, you're sharper and your writing is better, much, much better, cleaner, leaner, brevity and clarity. So once you've mastered news writing, then I think it's like a muscle and you're fit to then go and do the fancy stuff, the more colourful, more featurey.
So the news writing, I think, is the fundamental of your writing experience.
I think so. Yep.
Yeah. And because I Google it and find that someone review a book and give a very interesting assessment of a narrative journalism style. I think it's appealing and warm storytelling style. How do you think about that? Do you have your own definition of your journalism style, narrative journalism style?
No, and I reckon one of the things that I have seen sometimes that always confuses me is when people say trying to create a voice. I don't think you have a choice. You write what comes out. That's it. That's what it looks like. And possibly it's warm and appealing, thank you, love, whoever said that, is because I was writing emails home to friends with affection. And I was looking at the world around me with affection. I was having a great time. So if that comes through on the page, that would be why. And I imagine if I was in a very dark place writing something dreadful, it might be different. So I don't think you can choose that personally. Yeah. You just write, and that is your voice.
Because I learned the writing for media, and our tutor is Matthew Thompson, and he has his own special journalism style. Do you know that?
I know who he
Yeah.
is. I haven't read his work.
I think I cannot remember clearly about what kind of journalist style, but it's more strange one. He put all strange things or violence or kind of things he think is very special and other cannot find in his journalism style, in his narrative journalism. So because compared to your book, his book seems more sharp. Yeah, but I feel that your book is a very warmful and peaceful. Although there are some violence or crimes in here, I'm not sure how about you feeling of your own book? Yeah.
I've never thought about it. It just is. Truly.
Sure.
Mm.
So you didn't think about what kind of style of your writing itself? Ooh, amazing. So if you write others' book, do you like to define what kind of style of their book? No. No?
For my book?
Yeah.
No.
No.
For somebody else?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, of course. And I'll be critical of them and say, oh, they're this or they're that or whatever.
Yeah.
But for my own, I have no choice. It is what it is. My voice is what it is.
I think that is the amazing of the nonfiction was, because the next question is what kind of words you want to define yourself, literally narrative style, but you said that you didn't think nothing about yourself, just write it, edit, write it, edit. Oh yeah, I cannot include this.
You can't?
Because I read your book and I cannot include one word. I cannot use one word to describe a book or your book. It seems everything. It seems a lifestyle. I'm not sure it's a lifestyle of your book. Because your book including everything you looked, you see, you interviewed. So I cannot use one word to do a conclusion of your book.
Well, I'd say memoir.
Yeah, and because we all the new writer or student, and if you want to write in the form of narrative writing, what kind of tips you want to tell us?
Take notes.
Yeah.
The whole time. Lots and lots of notes.
No.
So Baby in a Backpack was from emails home. When I
Yeah.
came to write it, it was really hard because I didn't have the detail. I hadn't taken notice of it. And that was really hard. So when it came to Dragon's Voice, I kept a journal and kept detailed notes of every single day, every interview that I did, what was on the walls, what was on the... And it's that real iceberg. So you see this much, but that's all my Bhutan notes.
Oh.
So there's one little book that came out of, but there's a massive volume underneath of notes I collected, things I collected, invitations, because living in it, I wasn't sure what I would end up using. You don't know what the story will be while you're in it.
Yeah.
So you absolutely have to take notes. Take notes. Lots and lots of notes.
Sure, because in your book it took 12 months in here. So how could you after you leave Bhutan and move in Sydney, how could you remember clearly about the notes?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't remember the first few months.
Sure.
So you have to take notes, lots of notes.
So what about your process of writing the the journalism, the long form features? The process is you collect the notes either and...
Yes, and then my advice would be, for me personally, because I know not everybody works this way, and I'm always shocked when they don't work this way, because to me it seems the only way. But if I had to sit down at the start and write 100,000 words or 70,000 words, I just couldn't do it. Sure. That would be too big.
Yeah.
So I would write different vignettes. and they would be all over the place. And so then, depending on the mood I was in that day, and I would, write about inside the newspaper office when the coronation was on, and I'd write all about that. And then a couple of days later or a few weeks later, I'd choose something else to write about, and I'd construct that. So I ended up with these big lumps of writing, and then I sat down and started and filled it in and rearranged. But I think you should approach it as a series of vignettes.
Yeah.
You know what a vignette is? Vignette, vignette. Nette. They're like short, I don't know how to describe a vignette. Anyway, so lots of small, disconnected, but complete
I got that.
scenes, anecdotes. That, to me, is a more enjoyable way to write a book. Actually, it's the only way to write a book. If I had to sit down at the beginning and just write to the end, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I'd be bored. And I wouldn't know, and it'd be too hard, and it'd be awful.
Sure.
So that's my advice. But I'm going to have to wrap this up because I have another student coming.
Oh, sure. Just one more questions. So could you describe your book just briefly, 1 or 2 or 3 words?
The Dragon's Voice?
Yeah.
I'd say it's I don't know.
A book, the ebook.
Oh, it's a memoir and an account of Bhutan's unique media landscape. Because Bhutan is unique. It's an oral culture. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and the last question. So, could you describe your narrative, your own definition of the literary narrative journalism?
Oh, as in, is it creative non-fiction, narrative journalism, literary journalism?
Yeah. Just your own thinking?
I think narrative journalism's a good title. I like that. Yeah.
Your favorite one is the narrative journalism.
Yeah.
And how do you define them, just by your own words?
Oh, look,
briefly.
There's a whole book on that one. It's creative non-fictional. I don't know. It's an ongoing discussion in the scholarly community about what those definitions are.
Yeah.
I couldn't give it to you in 3 words. It's big.
It's big. I think everyone have their own definition.
Yeah.
So I just want to make yourself's definition.
I think it's facts written in a lively literary style, using literary conventions such as dialogue, immersion, description, observation.
Fantastic.
All right, you got to run. I got to go.
Okay.